Today, I'm having a conversation with two key figures from WPT Global. The first is Alex Scott, the president of WPT Global. Alex has almost 2 decades of experience in online poker, having worked previously with sites like PokerStars and Full Tilt. At WPT Global, he's focused on driving innovation in player experience and game integrity. Joining Alex is John Andress, who leads security solutions for WPT Global through his role at A5 Labs, which is WPT's security partner. John spent almost a decade as a high-stakes poker pro prior to making the transition into the security side of the industry. In our conversation today, we're going to discuss the challenges with game security and integrity, including combating bots and RTA, as well as the current quality of the games on WPT and the Rake. And we'll also get a deep look into their shared vision for WPT Global's place in the poker industry moving forward. Let's dive into the conversation. Alex and John, welcome to the podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you guys on here. It's not often that I get the chance to speak with people who are directly running poker sites and who are so in tune with the community and genuinely interested in engaging with the players. So thank you guys for that. And I'm excited to dive into everything that's happening at WPT.
Excited to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So first, just for some context, Alex, how did you first get into poker? What drew you to the game initially?
So I've been involved in poker for about 20 plus years, actually. It was one of those things where I was just playing poker with friends on their living room carpet with pennies. That's how I first got started. But I didn't get into it seriously until I went to university. And while I was there, me and a couple of friends founded the University Poker Society, and it became a thing where we played every single night. Quite often I was hosting home games around at my house. We played online. At the time, it was Party and Full Tilt. They were the places that we played the most. And it became a lifelong passion from there.
And looking back, how do you think that the poker scene has changed since you started, and where do you see online poker heading over the next few years?
So I think it's changed a lot. Obviously, there's been a lot of product development. There have been a lot of regulatory changes. There have been markets that have opened and closed. I think one of the things that stands out the most to me is how the skill gap between beginning players and experienced players has changed so dramatically in that time. When I first started playing poker, I read books. That's how I learned to play. And that's what we all did, actually. We read books and then we discussed hands on forums and in person and things like that. That was how we got good at the game, or at least better than most at the time.
Yeah, Super System and Harrington on Hold'em.
That's right. Harrington and Hold'em. I have great memories of reading that book.
Me too.
The Theory of Poker by David Sklansky was one that was really influential for me. And I actually wrote a book as well. Not that, well, I say not that long ago, about 14 years ago, quite a while ago. But nowadays, the way that you learn poker is totally different. If you got into poker today, then you would probably learn in the beginning from YouTube, TikTok, things like that. And then you'd progress to some of the more serious coaching that's available, video coaching or one-to-one coaching or group coaching or whatever from there. You probably wouldn't do what we did back in the day. And that's enabled people to get much better at poker much more quickly than they used to. And the gap between the most skilled players and the least skilled players is wider than it's ever been before, I think.
And what do you think the main risk is there?
We actually used to talk about this back when I first got into poker. At that time, people were saying that No Limit Hold'em was the skill gap between skilled and recreational players in No Limit Hold'em back then was too big and the game was dying out. This is what people said. They used to say this, and they used to say, well, Limit Hold'em will become the game that everybody flocks to because there the skill gap is not as wide and it's more sustainable as a game. That didn't happen. But No Limit Hold'em did evolve, and I think the game needs to continue to evolve. Otherwise, it will die out. Otherwise, people will be less interested in playing, and they'll just take their recreational time and money somewhere else.
Yeah, because if you never have a winning session or you never have a big winning session, then why would you ever want to play? I mean, that's that's why recreationals are drawn to the game, is that they can actually beat the pros.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a chance. Not only do you have a chance to beat the pros, but you have a chance to be successful in the long term. It's a game where you can learn and develop and get better and improve and have all of
Right.
the brilliant life experiences that come with that. You know, building new friendships and meeting new people and progressing and having that sense of getting better at something. I was thinking about this the other day. I think I am attracted to things that are difficult. Don't tell my wife I said that. But poker is a difficult game, and that's a good thing, right? The fact that something is difficult means that it is something you can get better at, that you can potentially become better than other people, you can compete. And that makes it interesting, and it makes it uh, a long-term, more of a long-term hobby than a short-term activity. For me, my other one that I've more recently got into is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's also very, very difficult. It's gonna
Yeah.
take me 10, 15 years before I'm good at it, probably. Um, but it's very similar to poker in that it's incredibly deep and you can continually work to get better, and you have all of these positive experiences that surround it.
I just want to add, I think like as a former poker player myself, the poker as a marketplace has become more efficient. So the challenges for new players or even recreational players, now that it's so easy, or not easy, but that there are so many skilled players, even at low stakes, it's really difficult for new players to like jump in, learn the game, and not lose a lot, and not from our end churn when they lose a lot. So it's a difficult balance when we have new customers come in, to give them a good experience, like have them have a chance to like have a winning experience where, even at the low stakes now, they're really good players, where maybe when I was playing, back in like 2008, 2009, there was a more evenly distributed skill hierarchy. So even a new player had a chance to like take their time, learn, move up the stakes. Like it's way more polarized now, where there's a lot of really good players, and then the new players have a difficult time kind of jumping up the ladder, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's been something that I've noticed, especially over the last couple of years since GCO Wizard came to a lot of popularity, is you will have even people playing 50 and L, like you just get these really smart kids who purchase a GTO Wizard subscription and they watch all this content on YouTube. And like within a few months, they're playing pre-flop really well and they don't have like a lot of post-flop leaks. And that's just like something that I almost never saw before the last couple of years, where like you would see a 50 NL player who's like actually a solid player and just doesn't have a totally trash game with all these leaks. So that's
Yeah.
been pretty surprising. All right, so I definitely want to get into how you are making the games more fun and enjoyable for recreational players as well as the regulars. But first, I'm going to talk about security a little bit. You've mentioned that WPT is using AI to keep the games fair. Can you tell me what that's about?
Yeah, so if I do the high level part of this, and then John can go into some more detail because John is really at the cutting edge of this issue, I think. Um, so the one of the big leaps that we had in game integrity in the history of online poker was when we started to use big data to detect game integrity issues. In the early days, when I first worked at PokerStars back in the day, data was expensive and you actually couldn't store that much of it and you couldn't interrogate that much of it. And that changed, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, something like that. Um, so we started to collect this enormous amount of data and process it. And we relied on some very simple ways of doing that. In the early days, we'd run a daily report, for example, that would highlight anybody who folded strong hands the previous day. We'd look for people who won, exceptionally large amounts of money or had very high win rate, things like that. but that was very simple. And what AI and machine learning in particular have helped us to do is to interrogate that data in a much more advanced way. And this is where John comes in, really.
Yeah, I just want to add a caveat. I'm not a technical person, right? But I'm the product lead for this, so I'll do my best to explain. But to build on what Alex said, I think like it maybe to draw an analogy, like when you see these like investigations that happen on 2+2, right? People go into Poker Tracker and they basically use heuristics to identify bots. The advantage of using machine learning or like deep learning when you're applying it to game integrity is that generally you want to answer some business question, and the model can leverage the data to answer that question at scale, right? So like whether it's pattern recognition or ranking or classification, you're utilizing different features that you have in the data to answer that question for our like end user, which is ultimately the security team, right? So like if we want to identify a group of bots that are playing similar, or we want to classify some type of outlier type behavior from gameplay, we can use different approaches in machine learning or deep learning to identify that and run it over the data in near real time, right? So this allows us to not only identify these things that are happening in the player pool, you know, at scale, but the advantage of some of these technologies too is that they are self-learning. So it's more future-proof in the way that, like, as you iterate on some of these models, it picks up things that, you know, basically like us, the human, or even an analyst isn't going to recognize in the data. So yeah, in short, it allows us to draw a lot of insights from the data that, you know, we wouldn't be able to get just kind of like sitting down in a, you know, hand to node or whatever and looking for bots manually.
Yeah. So can you go a little bit deeper into how it detects bots specifically?
I can talk like maybe at a high level about our approaches. So like if you kind of separate it into the different types of data, right? We obviously have gameplay. From my perspective, like that's the more future-proof way to identify RTI or bots, because it's always a cat and mouse game with kind of the other approaches, like what we call like invasive solutions when we're looking at their device, IP, login behavior, things like that. Especially the sophisticated bad actors iterate very quickly, you know, like in the way that they can hide certain things that we track or their location. So one thing that we've invested a lot in the last couple of years is actually gameplay modeling. For us to be able to like draw the insights that we need to have a good model of the game, whether that's like a GTO approach or reinforcement learning, which is, you know, the neural network approach, which isn't a bit different. I don't know if we want to go into too much detail about that, but it's a bit different than like the typical CFR algorithms you see in like POSOP or what GTO wizard's using. But yeah, we want to have this comprehensive overview of the game so that we at least have some type of baseline to like score actions or understand game actions, right? So basically what we're doing is we want to dump a lot of features into this model. With like more basic machine learning models, you could think of it like in a more rigid way where you want to answer a very specific question. So like, are these guys playing similarly, or is there some like outlier versus the population, right? With deep learning, it's a little bit more of a black box. So you could think of it like less linearly, like we want to answer some more general question. Like, you know, classify bots based on all of the historical bots that we found through their gameplay actions. And the output, there's not really usually an explanation for the output, but, you know, with all the features that you build, you're going to get some type of answer, and then you kind of go back retroactively and validate that the answer makes sense.
Is this the only way that WPT secures its games?
No, we still use all the traditional methods that Alex mentioned before, and like whether it's leveraging some like ultimately a lot of those kind of heuristics that he mentioned end up being still really good signals. So we have a team of I think over 60 people now. That's like if you want to take collusion as an example. Even we have a deep learning model to detect collusion from all the hand interactions that the players have when they're playing. But in the end, like every collusion case needs to come in context. So we still have the agent, who most of them are like former professional poker players, going in and like reviewing the hands, looking at the player relationships, looking at their account history. So that's like the more traditional thing, like where the end users end up reading the hands and like still building the case, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how tricky it is, like from a legal standpoint, if there's any issues with just speaking with players on the site directly and getting like sort of intelligence from them. But I would imagine that the combination of your AI security plus reaching out directly to the players on the site would be really powerful, because I'm as big of a believer in AI as anybody. Like it's like the LLMs like ChatGPT and Claude have just kind of taken over my life at this point. But I also think that the players are very, very good, especially at high stakes, at knowing, or at least having a pretty good sense of when an account is suspicious. Like we have a lot of communities where we just discuss suspicious accounts, like, hey, this guy's crushing, nobody's heard of him, he's making all of these like non-human plays. And then we can, in a lot of cases, we have site reps that we can report players to. So I think if a site like you guys, who has like the technology that's really advanced, can also do that, I think that would be the most powerful combination.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because we do work closely with players. Like with some of that intelligence we do ourselves, whether it's like infiltrating certain groups that we know are problematic, or working directly with players. Like Alex has done a bunch of marketing about our bounty program where whistleblowers get paid. I think even before WPT Global, I think the biggest bounty that we paid was over 300,000 USD. It was a very unique high stakes case. So where whistleblower provided us some information where basically the security team didn't have to do any work. They had video evidence, and it gave them a big reward, which, as a former poker player, was super rewarding. But in general, I think you're right that the players have a very good intuition that something is wrong. I think one of the things that maybe like the community doesn't do well is they have that good intuition, but they don't have like a quantifiable way to usually validate that, which is our responsibility ultimately, right? So in general, yeah, you're right. Their intuition's right, but it's a really hard problem when you actually like dive into it. Like now we have to validate that someone is using RT on the site, right?
In general, you guys seem pretty upfront about how WPT Global operates. I'm wondering what made you guys decide to be so open about things.
Well, two things really. One is that, frankly, we see it as an opportunity, because I don't think there's anybody else out there that is being as open with the community and engaging in the same way. We think this is one of the things that will differentiate us as a business, and also bring us all sorts of useful and interesting information. By getting out there and engaging with the community, we will learn a lot about what's important to poker players, and it will help us to validate some of the assumptions that we make, because as a startup business, you're constantly making assumptions about what you think the right decision is, and you have to test and validate before you continue. And one of the best ways to do that is to just throw out ideas to the community and get instant feedback, right? But it's also something I've done in the past. I've worked in the industry for a long time. I kind of grew up at PokerStars and made a lot of my early mistakes there, and learned a lot of lessons while I was there. But that was the culture at that business at the time. And I experimented with some of the things that I've been doing here. I experimented for the first time at MPN while I was there, and the culture there was kind of like poker was very small, and the wider business didn't really care much about it. We also didn't have very much budget, so we were constantly trying to figure out how can we get exposure for very little money. What are the things that we could potentially do? Well, one of the things we can do is we can write about stuff that we think is interesting, and if other people think it's interesting, then that message will spread. So yeah, it's kind of two-pronged. One is I know that it works. I've done it before. It's been somewhat successful. And two, we think it will make us different to the competition.
I think it's a right thing to do. In general, maybe a lot of the other operators don't want to talk about this type of stuff because it's bad for user acquisition. Ultimately, like they don't want to scare away new customers. But especially with AI, things have changed so much in the last few years. And even like the recreational user base is very aware of like the cheating problems with online poker. So I think a lot of the operators don't actually have a good way to define the problems that they're facing, and they don't want to talk about it. Maybe we're a bit more confident because we do, and I think it's good for us to just address it openly, right? Like it's advantageous to us to start talking about it.
Yeah, it seems like some sites don't talk about it. Other sites invite people to cheat on their site for a reward.
Yeah, I don't want to name names.
Anyway, let's move on. Let's take a quick break so I can tell you about my program, the Mobius GTO Stat Checker, which is now available for both MTTs and cash games. This program automatically compares your stats to solver data and pinpoints where you're off track, color coding your stats to show you where you're too passive or too aggressive compared to GTO. You can also use this program to analyze your opponent's tendencies and exploit their mistakes. For example, you can easily figure out how often your pool is bluffing on the river, and therefore how often you should be bluff catching. Plus, it's great for evaluating the quality of your games. You can check the average win rate of the regulars in your pool, or see how many hands in your database were played by recreational players. The Mobius GTO Stat Checker takes the guesswork out of your study routine, so you can focus on fixing your leaks and exploiting the leaks of your opponents. This course includes video modules to walk you through how to use the program and a support channel to make sure that you never get stuck. You can click the link in the show notes to learn more about the Stat Checker and purchase a copy for MTTs or cash games today. I've heard that WPT has had some pretty big high stakes games this year, and I know that running high stakes games comes with its own unique set of challenges. So what makes high stakes games difficult to manage?
My view is that high stakes has a different risk reward ratio or mix compared to lower stakes games. One of the simple things is that high stakes games are just more expensive to run, right? It costs us money. For when players deposit, we have to pay on average 6 or 7% of that to the payment processor. So the more money you deposit, the more money we pay. But also when you depositing very large sums of money, then we have all sorts of regulatory requirements that we have to follow, as well as moral requirements, right? If someone's depositing tens of thousands of dollars, you want to make sure that that person is okay, that they can afford it, that they, are not about to lose their house. So high stakes games, because of the amount of money that's moving around, are a lot more complicated and costly for us to run. They're also very dependent on a small group of VIP or whale type players, to be honest. So there's a really difficult balance to strike between making those players happy, because the games don't really run if they're not there, and keeping them around, but also like looking after those players to make sure that they're okay and that they're not losing more than they can afford and so on. but also looking out for the interests of serious high stakes players, less recreational players as well, and striking a balance. They're just a much more complicated proposition generally, and I can understand why. Particularly the heavily regulated sites might decide this is not worth the risk for us,
Yeah, can you go into that a little bit more? Why have some sites just decided to ditch high stakes altogether?
Well, my gut feel is that they either perceive the risk as extremely high. Obviously, there's regulatory risk, particularly around things like money laundering and source of wealth and all of that sort of stuff, which in markets like the UK, if you get that wrong, you can be fined millions of dollars, right? Millions of pounds, I should say. So there's that risk. And there's also, if unless you have a really active high stakes community and a lot of the sort of VIP players that high stakes games revolve around, then you're probably not making very much money from them either. Like the bread and butter of an online poker site is not the high stakes games. Generally, it's usually the mid stakes. Actually, that's where the most of the money comes from usually, because that's where you have a relatively large number of people playing, and also Rake is kind of at that maximum level per hand played. Micro stakes generally don't make very much, and high stakes, especially extremely high stakes, generally don't make very much either.
I would also guess like some of these sites look at the lifetime value of some of these high stakes players. Like if they are offering whatever 100, 200, 200, 400, they have to deal with everything Alex said with additional due diligence on deposits, withdrawals. But if that player also will play 10-20, he'll lose a lot slower and they'll rake more over his lifetime because he won't have those days where he like loses 100K and he'll play for 3 years instead of 2 months. And they realize that they're probably just making more money offering 10-20.
Yeah.
Which as a poker player, it's a little bit sad for me. Like I always thought that kind of the poker dream kind of still drives user acquisition and interest from a lot of recreational players. Like when they can log in and see people winning and losing $100,000 pots, they imagine that they're going to be doing that one day. But yeah, the high stakes side, I do think it's even more extreme skill hierarchy than we discussed earlier. So for operators that are less sophisticated and kind of their pool management element, they just don't even want to deal with it.
There's also one more thing here, which is something I used to deal with quite a lot when I was managing the MPN, because most of our operators were casino-focused operators. And frankly, those guys are going to look at a customer who's depositing $10,000 or $100,000, and they're going to say, if this guy plays casino, I'm going to make X% of that, whatever it might be. But if this guy plays poker, I might make nothing or hardly anything from that. And they're going to by far prefer that a customer like that plays casino or sports betting or whatever it might be, and doesn't lose their money to other players in poker. So that's a real consideration as well for some of the other sites, especially Stars, which is now run by a casino business essentially.
Yeah, this is why Ignition separated from Bovada a while ago. I don't know when that was, 2015 or 16, something like that.
Yeah. It's tricky because I think for myself and like anybody who is a professional poker player, we want sites to understand that there is this intangible quality about having high stakes on your site. Like, for example, people are still watching on YouTube videos of Isildur playing on Full Tilt Poker at super high stakes from 15 years ago, right? Or 10 years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. But so the site in that moment is not making money off those games. They might even be losing a bit of like money because of the challenges that you discussed. But if 100,000 people or, something, 10,000 people see that video and then they decide to log on to your site and start playing lower stakes because they're inspired to play poker because they think it's really cool. That's a sort of unquantifiable gain, but I do think it really has a big impact on the site's bottom line overall.
I agree with that. I worked at Full Tilt for about a year and a half. Joined actually just before Black Friday, a couple of months before Black Friday, so really bad timing. But yeah, I'm certainly aware of how powerful those high stakes games, and actually just the Red Pro system in general, how powerful that was for Full Tilt in terms of acquisition. Lots of people signed up because they wanted the opportunity to play against the pros. Lots of people found it interesting to watch games that they were playing in. And I think there's still a lot of value in that. High stakes is obviously it's more interesting to watch for somebody to play for money that is really meaningful to them. Poker's always more what's the right word? I don't really know what the right word is. It's a more interesting proposition when people are playing for money that's meaningful to them, where it hurts a little bit to lose. So high stakes always has that going for it, right? And it does make for a more interesting viewing proposition. And I think we need a way to bring that back. Something we've discussed a little bit, and you might see something from us in the future.
Yeah, I think it's really important for the big poker sites to have railable high stakes games, and ideally even like chat too, like, you know, similar to the old days. I would love to see that in the future. Let's talk about the Rake at WPT. There's been some talk among players, especially at higher stakes, about unannounced increases in Rake and removal of Rake back recently at WPT. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, so the first part is actually not correct. That we haven't had any unannounced changes in Rake recently. The last change to Rake was something like 9 months ago, 8 or 9 months ago, so quite a while ago now. And these concerns came up relatively recently. So yeah, there hasn't been an unannounced change in Rake recently. There has, however, been a change to the way that we reward affiliates. And that's where the concerns about rakeback come from, right? So what had happened was some players had signed up through affiliates in order to get rakeback. And we changed the way that we reward affiliates for the players that they bring, which made it much more difficult for them to offer rakeback to players. And therefore, some players are not getting rakeback anymore. Now, the rationale behind that change was we don't actually, and we've always had the same mentality. We've always been saying the same thing to affiliates over the years, right? We've always been saying you need to bring good quality players. You can't only bring players who drain money from the ecosystem and don't add anything back, right? There's always a balance. So a lot of affiliates weren't doing that. And we changed the way that we reward affiliates to reward a lot less for players who are categorized as pro in our FairGame system or experts in our FairGame system, and to give more in other circumstances. So we gave more for MTTs, for example, PLO, spins, things like that. And the idea was basically to incentivize affiliates to change the way that they acquire traffic.
Got it. So yeah, so I don't play on the site, obviously from the US, so I'm not as in tune with what's going on at the site or the Rake, but I've heard that it's a one straddle cap at all stakes. Is that correct at WPT?
John is the expert actually here on this. I'm not sure that's correct actually.
Okay.
I think it's something like it depends on the stake. It's different at every stake, 3 to 4% one straddle cap. Sounds right. Yeah.
Okay. How do you think that your Rake compares to a site like GGPoker? Because they have kind of set the bar pretty low in as far as competing with them on the Rake. So I'm wondering if you think that WPT could be able to lower the Rake and sort of attract some of their users.
I think, don't quote me on this because it wasn't my decision operationally, but I'm pretty sure when we when they were looking at setting the rake, they looked at GG and said it's slightly lower or exactly the same in almost every stake, except maybe high stakes. So I think that it's competitive with GG's rake. Yeah, this was a while ago when we remembered. I know we looked at GG's rake when, having this discussion.
Let me sort of talk about something here, right? We're a new entry to the online poker market relatively. We've been around for about 2.5 years. And how is a poker startup going to be successful today? What do we need? What are the things that we need to make money? We need to make money. We need to be able to invest that into promotions, into marketing, into growth. We need liquidity. And the other thing that's really special about us is our brand, obviously our association with the WPT. But if you look at the online poker startups of the last few years, which ones have been successful and which ones haven't? Okay, we can start with the ones that haven't been successful. Run It Once, great team behind it, fantastic team, really well thought through software in lots of ways. One or two deficiencies, fair enough, but low rake, couldn't make any money and ultimately failed. There's an excellent documentary about Phil's experiences working with that. I really recommend watching it. Full Poker has come along and can't afford to pay its own staff. It's essentially it's that close to liquidation. It's already failed, right? Who else has come along in the last few years? Can't think of one that's
Global,
really okay. Global's a little bit different because they have a very different business model. Okay, that's a good point though. Who has been really successful? Who's been really successful? The apps have been really successful, and GGPoker's been really successful. The apps and GGPoker both have very, very high rake, but what they've been able to do is turn that into growth. So there's two things you can do. One is you can reinvest the money that you're making into growing the site, into acquiring new players, into running promotions for existing players. And GG, for all its faults, does give a lot of money away via rewards and so on to its players. You can do that. And you can, when you charge high rake, you can choose who you give the money to. If you just charge low rake, then everybody at the table benefits from that. Fine. You could argue that that's a good thing. If you charge higher rake, then you can allocate some of the money that you give back in different ways to different people so that you change behavior of the player pool in a way that benefits the game as a whole. So essentially what I mean is you can give more of that money back to the players that have a positive impact on the ecosystem, and you can give less back to players who have a negative impact on the ecosystem. And we have gone for high rake, high rewards model, with most of the rewards going to the people that we think have a net benefit to the ecosystem.
Yeah, I definitely understand that it's not, you're a business, you have to make money, and it's not like, I mean, look, you can look at ACR as an example of very low rake, right? But you kind of have to look at it as you have to pay for the quality of the experience that you're getting. So if you play on ACR where there's like almost negligible rake at a lot of stakes, well, the software ends up being pretty garbage and the game integrity is not where we want it to be. But if you're paying the site more to play on there, then the site will provide better services. So
I do want to make an important point. Sorry to interrupt you. I want to make an important point that we've been around for 2.5 years, and while yes, we have made a profit, we've reinvested pretty much all of that, pretty much 100% of that into growth. And that's how we've got to number 2 in the online poker business, is by reinvesting into growth. And that's how we'll eventually, I think, compete with GG for the number 1 spot. I don't think we could have done that with low rake. I honestly don't. I think we would probably be out of business if we didn't charge enough. I don't think it's feasible for a new online poker site to come along and charge the same rate as PokerStars or ACR and be successful.
Yeah, Yeah, and I understand that like the community is pretty sensitive to this topic about, and it's not ever popular to discuss your rake. So it's always refreshing whenever a site does it transparently. But I'm going to probe a little bit deeper with some more rake questions. So GG definitely has high rake. I think what players are concerned about right now is that it is still profitable on GG. It kind of depends on the stake a little bit, but you can still make a good living playing poker right now. But there have been instances where GG like totally unannounced tried to raise the rake a lot. And I think players kind of feel like we're in a very fragile situation where if they raise the rake more, we're at risk of uh, poker becoming unbeatable. So that's a very delicate situation. Furthermore, the model of GG is such that it doesn't really make sense for players to rate to reg battle at all, uh, because you're paying a minimum of a big blind or two per hundred at even at high stakes. I think their rake right now at 25.50 is around 4, and then you might get a third of that back through their rewards. So even at 25.50, it doesn't make sense to battle other regs because you're just not going to have that big of an edge against another reg. So you're just kind of both going to be bleeding out to the rake. And that does make poker feel a bit predatory, honestly, because like poker is a unique game where we we know that we are primarily profiting off of the casual players who kind of fuel the whole ecosystem. But there is also this reg battling culture where we compete fiercely against one another. So first, I just wanted to ask, do you think that high stakes reg battles are important for online poker to grow?
Yes. So in terms of reg battles, obviously they play a really important function because they essentially keep games running where they might otherwise break. So if regs never played against each other, then games would break much more quickly. And actually, when we introduced a feature called alias changes at a business I worked in the past at the NPN, and what we saw is more reg battles, and that was really beneficial to the ecosystem because prior to that change, people could just avoid each other, and after the change, they didn't know who they were playing against. So they essentially got involved in more reg battles by accident. But yeah, really important for keeping games running, and it's something that we are actually incentivizing right now through a table starter rakeback system. So if you are one of the first two players at one of our tables right now at all stakes, you can get up to 40% rakeback by being one of those table starters. And this is, I'm going to say, not final, still an experiment. We're still trying to find the best balance between rake and rewards to keep tables starting, to keep tables running, and to incentivize those reg battles, which we know are good for the health of the game. So we're talking about this constantly at the moment. Have we got the balance right between the two? I think, to be honest, we probably haven't got it perfect. We're getting closer, but there's still some optimization to do, I think, to get the best out of this for everybody.
Do you see players going head to head very often with the current rake structure?
More often than they were before we introduced the table starter rakeback, yes, definitely, but probably not as much as we would like. Go on, John, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to add, I especially at higher stakes, I think the whole topic around the ecosystem engagement is very sensitive in this way. Like the regs, especially at high stakes, are very aware of how much they're paying in rake, what it costs them to start a table, how much they're winning in the pool. Like basically they know what they're going to put up with as far as what the site will rake. I think historically, like especially even before I was working full time, started consulting, I think there are less reg battles than like in the old days. The pro community is a lot more predatory because, like again, the market's more efficient. You can't just take a risk and battle pros at high stakes unless you have like a clear edge. So whether that's the rake or you're just like destroying someone heads up, there's probably a better opportunity somewhere else. That being said, like Alex mentioned, it is really important for us to have an environment where the high school players can start tables, right? Like typically recreational players don't like to sit heads up and play or play shorthanded. They want to join a table that's already running and just hop right into the action. So we do need to find that balance where like we can incentivize or at least create an environment where the pros are happy to start games because they know they're going to be rewarded later, whether it's like with a profitable situation or rewards or whatever. Otherwise, if they don't start the games, then we lose, the pros lose. It's like a lose-lose situation. So you can almost think of, especially the highest skilled players as employees in that way. Like we want to incentivize them to get the games going for us and maintain the games. But yeah, obviously if the rake is super low, we don't, the company doesn't make any money.
Yeah, I think that a flexible rake system could be the future of online poker, and I'm really curious to see more sites experiment with that moving forward.
Yeah, we actually early in WPTG experimented with kind of a skill-based rake back. It was really poorly executed, but I think basically looking at the makeup of the table and distributing rake back. So, for example, obviously, if you're playing like a reg battle, we give you a ton of money back. But the second a VIP comes and everybody's making 10 shuttles per 100, that money goes back to the VIP, right? And especially with some friends in the high stakes community really like that idea. So I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of circle back to some of those ideas in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to come back actually, Patrick, to something you said about poker being a game where you can win. And because you actually highlighted the important thing here, like a lot of people focus on rake because it's the price that they're paying effectively to play the game. But far more important, in my opinion, is how much can I win playing the game, right? How much can I win per 100 hands or per hour? That's the important thing. And we've been talking about this for 20 years. Mason Malmuth wrote about it probably 30 or 40 years ago about what would you choose, the game where you can win the most money or the game that has the lowest rake? Obviously, you should choose the game where you can win the most money. And this is one of the things that's really special about us, is because the way that we manage our ecology and some of the AI systems that we use, like FairGame, you can win a lot more on WPT Global than you can on GG or Stars. Even if we have the same rake as GG, you can still win far more. And ultimately, that's what's important.
So FairGame is the system where you cap the number of regs at each table, and you kind of flip the traditional rec to reg ratio at the table, right?
Essentially, yeah. So it's an AI system which categorizes every player into a number of different categories. You can essentially, for simplicity, think of it as expert players and casual players. Think of it that way. We limit the number of expert players who can sit on any table. Most games it's 2. And that means that essentially we have a better balance of casual players and experts at every table than any other online poker site, basically, because most, as you suggested, most online poker sites, you sit down, there's probably 6 expert players and 1 casual player.
Yeah, let's not sugarcoat it. At 1, 2, or even $50 and above, when you play on Stars or GG, at a 6 max table, you're playing. It's usually 5 pros and 1 fish. So it's not. And in those situations, the recreational player is losing 20 or more, maybe 40 big blinds per 100, especially with how good a lot of the best pros are now.
It's usually 30 to 40. And yeah, if you just sort of do the math, if there's 5 regs and then you have 1 casual player losing at 30, then each reg is getting 6 big blinds on average from the casual player, right? So if the rake is higher than 6 big blinds, then that means the average regular is going to be losing in that game.
Let's be honest, on Stars and GG, there's a lot of tables where there are no casual players at all.
Right. Yeah. And those players are just losing basically at low stakes. Okay, so the fair game system, you mentioned the division between experts and casuals. Are there other groups in between that, or is it mainly just looking at like a hard line between pros and recreationals?
John knows this better than I am. But
It's flexible in the way that we can create whatever segment we want based on the way that the model works. I think in No Limit, where like it's currently deployed, we set it in a conservative way where the expert players are, we want to be sure that they're expert. We don't obviously want to ruin the user experience for someone who's like middle of the road, recreational, but like slightly winning. And typically when you actually look at the distribution of win rates, that's kind of how it works out. You have some players winning a lot of money, everyone else around break even, losing, if I'm going to be blunt. So I think the good thing is that when you do ecosystem management in this way, you can think of it like a private game. So if you are a recreational player and you're playing on Stars or GG, you have no shot of winning, jumping in like a 5-10 table against 5 other regs. But in this environment, you're gonna be guaranteed to be playing against other casual players. So like the regulars obviously win more, but it's not linear in the way that they win all the money from all the recreational players. It's not how poker works, right? Like if you're at a table where there's 3 experts and all of our games are 8-handed and 5 casual players, right? It's almost like a private game environment playing with other players who aren't dedicating their lives to poker. So we obviously see that in the data too. There's, on average, players are winning more or closer to break even, or we retain them longer, obviously, because they have more of a chance to win and like learn and get better and eventually try to be one of those winning players.
Have you run into any issues with tables not filling up just because there aren't enough recreational players?
I would say,
you can go, Alex.
I was going to say that doesn't generally happen except in games with low overall liquidity. So doesn't happen in No Limit Hold'em because we have excellent liquidity at pretty much all stakes of No Limit Hold'em. Has happened from time to time in our PLO games because we have low liquidity in PLO. Although I would say actually we don't apply the FairGame AI system to PLO at the moment, partly for that reason, because it just wouldn't allow enough tables to start.
Yeah, it's not so restrictive in the way, like we're obviously taking a look at the makeup of the player pool. So in Alex's example, where at an 8-handed table, there's maximum of 2 experts. That's also in games where we're looking at like the overall player pool and seeing that the majority of them are recreational. At higher stakes, the highest stakes typically at an 8-handed table, it's 4. Maximum 4 players, because like there's a bit of a delicate balance. Like if we make it 6, the second AA VIP sits, they're sitting with 6 pros and they get destroyed. 4 at the high stakes is kind of that sweet spot where the regs will battle. We always have seats reserved for recreational players to join, even if it's like 1 rec and 4 experts. And then obviously if the table fills up, it's a good situation for everybody. So like it kind of, at the upper middle stakes, we allow 3. And then where we have a ton of liquidity and a ton of recreational players, are a bit more restrictive. But typically there's, not an issue with players finding tables and then games starting.
I think a lot of us in the poker world can see where things are headed if sites continue to up the rake. Do you think that WPT can be the site that the community is holding out for?
I think so, because as I said earlier, what really matters is, can you win? Well, that's one of the things that really matters. Like, one of the things that distinguishes poker from every other kind of casino gambling game is you can actually win and be successful in the long term. You can get better. You can move up in stakes. We need to preserve that dream. That is core to the overall poker experience, right? One of the differentiating features of poker. So we provide that. We are fundamentally different on that point. You can win far more on WPT Global than anywhere else because of the way that we manage our ecology. So yes, in that sense, we can be different. I would also say I've always believed, because I've always worked ever since I left PokerStars, I've always worked for challenger online poker businesses, and I've always felt like it's important to differentiate from whoever the market leader is at the time. So I used to say, for example, there's no point in us being a smaller PokerStars, because why would you play on a smaller PokerStars? There's what's the benefit to that? You have to play on something that's significantly better in some way, significantly different in some way. So we have to establish ourselves as that alternative. So it probably won't be enough to only be better on the win rate front, right? Uh, we also have to develop new differentiating factors, new exciting functionality, new ways to live your poker dream, whatever your dream might be. And there's a lot of interesting things coming that I think will help us to do that.
That's awesome to hear. Let's wrap up with a few community questions while we're on this topic. I asked my followers if they had any questions, so I'm just going to share a few of those. Daniel says, why is the verification process difficult for some, yet sponsor creators can VPN and they're good to go? Where is the fairness? I'm not sure what he's referring to exactly, but
I know what he's referring to, and and it's not quite right, because what he thinks here is that we have across the WPT, we have sponsored ambassadors, right, who are paid to represent us, and sometimes they play on WPT Global. And I think your follower believes that whoever it might be is using a VPN to do that. That's not the case. We don't allow VPNs for anybody. However, if and what he's referring to specifically, I think, is when an ambassador plays from a region like the US. Now, I understand why this feels weird to people, but fundamentally, our ambassadors are not allowed to win while they play on WPT Global, and so it's kind of a different legal proposition, and this is something that we've tested with lawyers and so on and so forth. Essentially, when our ambassadors play on WPT Global, they're playing for promotional purposes. They're not playing with their own money. They're not depositing their money. They're not withdrawing any winnings or anything like that. They're playing just to demonstrate what it's like to play on WPT Global. And so this is one, it's legally clear that this is allowed. And two, it's good for the player pool, because if you've got a player who can't win and yet has access to money, that's great.
is it clear to the viewers that is the case? Do you think that it could be made clearer? Because I'm not sure if people understand that when they watch.
Yeah, I think we can make it clearer. I think that's a fair comment. We do get this question from time to time, and yeah, I appreciate it's kind of weird for people to get their head around. So yeah, maybe we can make it clearer.
Okay, J. Rue says, what is the deal with regs getting shadow blocked from tables? So I guess I would add, is there some sort of shadow blocking system, or is it more of a feature of the FairGame that maybe some players feel like they can't get a game?
Yeah, it's not a shadow blocking system. It's FairGame in action, basically. And what it does is it limits the seats that you can occupy. And if there is no seat available at a table, it doesn't show you that table. So, let's say there's 2 seats where expert players can sit. If both of those seats are occupied, I don't see that table in the lobby. And again, this is something that I think we can do better, and we've spoken about it quite a lot. How can we make this clearer what's going on so that people understand it more easily. But it's not shadow blocking. This is something that we're being completely open and transparent about.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think there's a lot of confusion, like about what WPT does with ecology management and like pure player pool segmentation. And there's no player pool segmentation where, you know, the pros play in one pool and the recreational players play in the other. And for what it's worth, like that doesn't really work. It's obviously bad for the players other than the recreational players, but it's bad for the poker site too, because like I mentioned before, the games don't run, the site makes less rake, the pros leave, the recreational players don't see tables running, they leave, and everybody loses. So we've done experiments with that. Like also, you know, as a poker player, I've seen sites do this and everybody leave. I think 888 did it back in the day at a lot of their mid-stakes games. But that's not what's going on. And like Alex said, the user experience on our side isn't always super clear. So I know that there's some planned improvements with that. But
yeah, I mean, just to add to that, we're essentially doing this for the first time. We're the first online poker site to do this kind of thing, and we're learning how to communicate it. You know, one of the things that's changed over the last 8 or 9 months since I've been in my current role is I have been getting out there talking about this a lot. And as I've done that, and as people have asked me questions, I've realized that actually we need to communicate these things in a different way sometimes, in a way that's clearer to people and easier for them to understand. So we're getting better at it, but we are by no means perfect at this yet. We're still working on it.
from the feedback I received from a lot of the pro players, when they first start, it's a bit confusing, but then obviously after that, they really like it. Like, you know, when I go back to GG and play against 5 other regs. So in fact, even when we've done some experiments like Lucia interchange restrictions, they demand that we bring it back because it, you know, usually is advantageous for bum hunters or predatory players that don't want to start tables or hang around till VIP joins.
Speaking of GG, does WPT consider, this is a question from Alexander, do you consider joining forces with other major poker sites such as GG or Stars to fight against cheating?
Well, me and John might have a different answer here to this. I've always been an advocate of this, and if anybody who's has followed me previously, they'll know that I've tried twice to get an initiative off the ground to share information on known cheaters among different online poker sites. The first time it came out of a meeting with a guy called Alex Dreyfus, and then the second time it was actually spearheaded by Rob Young, who was involved in Party at the time. But yeah, I'm very much in favor of this. And what I would say is that when you actually get down to it, it's very hard to do. There are a lot of legal restrictions on the kind of information you can share, particularly around personal information, where you can share it, who you can share it with, that kind of thing. There are also limitations on how much you can cooperate with your competitors. There's an idea called competition law, which basically means you can't come to secret agreements with your competitors, and there are a lot of nuances to this law which are which make implementing something like this quite challenging. I still think we will get there as an industry eventually. I still think it would be beneficial, but I also now that I'm in the position running an online poker site where we have a lot of really good proprietary technology, there is a part of me that wants to keep it to ourselves.
Yeah, I've always been open to the information sharing around like problems or bad actors. I've had these discussions with not people directly at GG, but some of their ambassadors or their security panel about this. Didn't really go forward. But like Alex said, I think it's really difficult and probably won't happen with technology sharing, but there are other ways around kind of like blacklist sharing or some information about certain groups that get shared that's pretty advantageous for both parties. And to GG's credit, I do think they have the, you know, like a similar view to game integrity and ecology that we do. I just, you know, I know we've been in contact with them through various channels about some of these issues. It just hasn't really gone forward in any tangible way.
I can definitely see how it would be more difficult than it seems to coordinate it. But it's a shame because I think that especially these days where a major issue is the bot farms, this is the kind of thing where if you could eliminate a few bad actors, like you could probably take out the majority of the cheating just by knocking out a few people from online poker, unilaterally. So hopefully we get there at some point because it seems like it would just be a huge improvement to online poker as a whole.
I don't know if that would address the issue with the bot farm, the one you're referencing specifically on 2+2. But yeah, it is advantageous for us to share information about groups like that. That's a net bad for poker, whether it's for us or our competitors, because it's destroying user experience, especially for recreational players that are kind of unaware.
Mm-hmm.
I think however this evolves, the first step will be sharing information on the people that we've caught. It won't be sharing how our technology works or anything like that, unless we license our technology or something like that. But sharing information on the people that we've caught, particularly the people that have the potential to cause a lot of damage to the game overall, that's how this is likely to begin, I think, this kind of collaboration.
I think that's a good place to wrap up. I want to thank you guys both for taking the time to chat today. And I'm really optimistic about WPT. I think you guys are just very different from any other site that is operating right now. Before we finish, I just want to ask you, what is your big picture plan for WPT Global over the next 5 years or so?
So I think I touched on this before, but essentially the vision that we share with WPT and with the other WPT licensed companies, if you like, is we're here to make poker players' dreams come true. That's our big vision. And we know that that means different things to different people. And we have to hit a lot of different bases along the way. Some people just want to travel the world and make, have these amazing experiences at live tournaments, make friends, things like that. That's a dream that we need to support. And that's partly going to come through our side, making it as easy as possible for people to qualify for events like that. And it's partly going to come through the WPT, making their events really amazing places to be. And then, people have all sorts of different dreams that we need to cater for as well. But the end goal is, wherever you are in the world, whatever kind of poker you're interested in, whatever kind of journey you want to go on in this game, we have something for you that delivers on that. That's where we're trying to be.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with my listeners before we wrap up?
I would just add like Alex shared kind of that vision for WPT. For me specifically, I need to address the AI problem in online poker. That's an existential threat in the next 5 years, maybe shorter, especially with all of it's cool but frightening for online poker, cool advances in the AI technology. So need to be able to not just identify that, but identify quickly so that we can, keep this a game of skill with people still want to deposit and wager millions, if not billions in aggregate against each other every year.
Well, I'm sure we could definitely do a whole round 2 about that topic. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.